Okay, so this one we're going to talk about calcium. And we're going to mostly talk about how the calcium level in the blood is regulated. And the key is in the blood. So blood. Okay, so blood calcium level. And what contributes to that is going to be, so in your body, where is a majority of the calcium? In the bones, right? So bone is really important. You can take calcium out of the bone and put it into the blood, or you can go the other way around. The other important thing is you can also regulate how much calcium is being excreted. So that would be kidney. So that would be calcium excretion. And if that's not enough, if you're really low on calcium, then you want to actually take some in. So intestines. So you want to absorb more calcium from your dietary source. So that would be through intestines. So that would be absorb calcium. Okay, so let's talk about what regulates all of these. So okay, I'll do blue. So when you have low calcium, let's start with the low calcium scenario. Low calcium. Low calcium. It's going to stimulate the production of PTH, parathyroid hormone, from the chief cells. And if it's stimulated during a low calcium situation, its effect is trying to fix that problem. So it wants to increase calcium. So it's gonna try to increase this way, increase the, well, basically make bone give up more calcium and put it into the blood. It's going to decrease the excretion of calcium. And then there's a little bit of something else we need to talk about here. So, but PTH cannot do anything about absorption of calcium from your intestines. So what it needs to do is have some vitamin D made, and vitamin D can actually play a part in increasing the absorption of calcium. So vitamin D can do this. So what you need to do is somehow indirectly make that happen. So kidney is able to make vitamin D, and PTH will want to increase that production of vitamin D somehow. And this is all good, except one problem is when you have, so bone is basically made out of calcium and phosphate, right? Calcium and phosphate makes up bone. So if you really have that much calcium in the blood, so if you're degrading bone and you're making both calcium and phosphate and that ends up in the blood, you don't want it to just start precipitating and forming into bone right in your circulatory system. So you want to make sure that whenever you have a lot of calcium in your blood, that you don't also have a lot of phosphate. Does that make sense? If you have both of them very high at the same time, it's probably going to precipitate, and that's not going to be good. So you want to make sure that if you're increasing the calcium, you're somehow decreasing the phosphate. So what happens here is your kidney can basically moderate how much calcium is being excreted, absorbed, or how much phosphate is being excreted, absorbed. So phosphate, so in this case, you're going to do excretion of calcium. But when it comes to phosphate, you want to, oh, sorry, this is should be calcium retention. And then at the same time you're retaining more calcium, you want to excrete more phosphate. So they have to be coupled together. Otherwise, bad things will happen in your circulation. So these two are sort of happening together under the effect of PTH. Okay. So vitamin D basically does a lot of the things what PTH does, and the only thing that's unique is over here, the intestinal absorption of calcium. And as you would expect, what it does is basically it'll open some calcium channels. So calcium channel, and it will have also upregulate calbindin. So all these things would just help you absorb calcium. Okay, and then we'll talk a little bit how it regulates itself. What was that? Oh yeah, that, okay, sorry. I had it written the other way. Yeah, no, this should be upregulating. You're right. I was wondering why I wrote the other way here. So it should, sorry, just to reiterate, PTH will increase kidney retention of calcium, but it will make you excrete phosphate. So the end result would be more calcium, less phosphate. So you don't have random bone formation in places that's not supposed to happen. You guys talked about calcitonin today, I believe, or Friday today. So calcitonin does a lot of the opposite things as PTH, and it seems like it would be really important on paper, but it turns out you normally don't have, it doesn't normally play that much of a role. You don't normally have that much calcitonin. So physiologically, it doesn't really do too much. The only place that it is used is to treat osteoporosis. So if you give a lot, it does have some effect. So calcitonin, what it would do is it would do the opposite here. And calcitonin would have the opposite effect on the calcium retention. So over here it would actually be decreased, but not really physiologically important. So normally this doesn't play too much of a role. Okay, so this is the general gist of what's happening. So we'll talk about what's happening in the bone, and then we'll talk about the kidney, and then how PTH is being made. I'm gonna scroll down a little bit. So let's start with the bone, since that's where your storage of calcium comes from. So bone. So in the bone, you have two different types of cells. You have osteoblast, and then you have, so osteoblast makes bone. And then you have osteoclast. And that would be bone reabsorption or breakdown bone. But if you think about normally what's happening in your bone, you have to have both of them happening at the same time for remodeling to occur. So both of them are needed for remodeling. So if you're making bone somewhere, you might want to get rid of some somewhere else. So for the remodeling process, both of these are happening at the same time. So it would make sense that these are somehow linked, and it is. So osteoblast will actually stimulate osteoclast differentiation. So it will make the precursor pre-osteoclast differentiate into osteoclasts. So this will actually stimulate it. And what PTH does is PTH will just stimulate osteoblasts. So it seems counterintuitive if you don't realize that osteoblasts actually helps the osteoclast differentiation. And ultimately what's happening is you're breaking down bone. Okay. And while we're over here, we have estrogen. Estrogen is going to result in increased bone density. So what it's doing is it's upregulating the osteoblast, but for making bone, but at the same time it's inhibiting osteoclasts. So you'll have more bones being made, but you don't have as much osteoclast being differentiated, and it's not breaking down as much bone. So this is where the calcium is coming from. So if you have osteoclast differentiation, it's going to break down bone, and then it's going to increase calcium level in the blood. So this is the action of PTH and how it's fixing that low calcium situation. So low calcium somehow results in the production of PTH, and then it goes to the bone. It allows for osteoclast differentiation, and then more calcium is being put back into them. So kind of goes back here. Okay. So now let's we know the overall general gist of how it's being regulated. We're going to talk a little bit more about how PTH, how the production of PTH is regulated. So is there any questions so far about this general picture? Question? No? Okay. So now we're going to talk about PTH, how it's being made and all that good stuff. Okay, so I briefly mentioned before, but what cell makes PTH? Chief cells in the parathyroid, right? So this is a chief cell, and this is in parathyroid somewhere, and it's in the parathyroid, it's in the thyroid somewhere, right? So we'll talk about the low calcium situation. So this is low calcium. So normally in these chief cells, it has an adenyl cyclase. And it goes through the whole cyclic AMP, and then protein kinase A. And what it stimulates is, I should have probably gone back a step, but so in these chief cells, you'll have PTH being made, and then PTH is made, and then it's in these vesicles. And in the vesicles, these PTH is continuously getting degraded into these C fragments, C terminal fragments. And C terminal fragments are inactive. It doesn't do anything. PTH is the only thing that will cause all of the stuff happening to increase blood calcium, so this is active. And the longer PTH stays in this vesicle, the more time it has for this degradation to happen. So this is going to degrade. and then eventually this is going to be excreted. So the longer it stays in this vesicle, the more chance it has for this degradation process to happen. But what adrenaline cyclase does is it'll make it just secreting it. So if this pathway is really active, then this vesicle is always getting secreted, and you don't have much time to degrade the PTH to form into C fragments. So if it's short time, you have mostly PTH. And then if it stays in a long time, you have more C fragments. Sorry, C fragments. Okay. So this is all very much time dependent. So as you can see, what's really limiting this whole thing is how soon the vesicle is being sent out of the cell, right? So basically this process is what's determining the time, how long it's staying in that vesicle being degraded. So without calcium, this is just gonna get secreted. So now, in a different scenario, I'm gonna try to just copy this so I don't have to redraw. Oh. Okay. I'm gonna copy this exact image and then show you what else can happen here. Okay, so what calcium does is, let's assume that you have high calcium. High calcium. There are actually two things on the membrane that will, so we have a G protein thing going. This is a calcium sensitive receptor. And the calcium is going to bind right here, and it's going to do two things. This is both a G inhibitory, and this is a GQ. So the G inhibitory is going to inhibit the adenylyl cyclase right here. So without adenylyl cyclase, you're not going to have all these happening, so it's not going to make the vesicles secrete. So the PTH is going to stay in the vesicle for a long time. It's going to have a lot of chance to get degraded. So, long time. Okay, so you're going to have more C fragments, or it's not going to get secreted at all. And now the GQ, what that's going to happen is, we know that it's going to go through the phospholipase C, IP3, but ultimately what happens is it's going to result in calcium being released from the ER, and at the same time, this will upregulate this calcium channel. And calcium will actually increase this process even further. So there will be more degradation, and calcium is going to further inhibit the release of the vesicle. So under high calcium situation, you won't have much PTH release. So essentially no PTH when there's a lot of calcium. The only time you're going to see a significant amount of PTH, so I'm going to scroll over to the other side, is going to be the low calcium situation, because you don't have this calcium sensitive receptor being stimulated, and you're going to have lots of PTH. Okay. So does this make sense to everyone? These two scenarios? Okay. If you guys have questions, feel free to ask afterwards too if something didn't make any sense. So now we just have one more thing to do after this. because we talked about the general idea of how everything's regulated and how the bone portion of this is regulated, and now we went back to talk about how PTH is being made, and then the other effect of PTH is going to be on the vitamin D. So we need to talk a little bit more about vitamin D. So PTH should somehow increase vitamin D, and that happens in many different places, but the regulation is in the kidney. So the PTH actually upregulates something in the kidney. And the vitamin D synthesis has several steps. So there's one step in the skin, and then another step in the liver. And then finally, this last step is gonna happen in the kidney. And the last step, this enzyme is called 1-alpha hydroxylase. And 1-alpha hydroxylase is going to be the last step in making the active vitamin D, which is 1,25 dihydroxycalciferol. Should I just dihydroxycalciferol? I don't know how people normally, is it like this abbreviation? All right, I'm going to abbreviate it like that for now. So this is the active form. This is the one that will go to the intestines and cause increase in reabsorption. So I'll post something that actually has the names, but I'm not sure whether you actually need to know the name. Do you remember? Maybe not for this. So I'll abbreviate it for now. But what I want you to see is that PTH is going to upregulate this step, 1-alpha hydroxylase, and this occurs in the kidney. And this is a 25 hydroxycalciferol. But anyway, there's 2 products that can be made from this intermediate, and the other one is like less active. So less active, or not very active, weak, not active. And when you have a lot of vitamin D, it actually limits its own production, so it will increase this one, so you end up making less vitamin D, and it will inhibit this step. But the importance with vitamin D is it can do one thing that PTH cannot do, which is increase the reabsorption of calcium from your GI. And I think we're so Tony, do you want to do your? So this is it for the parathyroid and calcium regulation. There are some details about some diseases. I'll post that. It's very straightforward. You just have to know the names of these diseases and what goes wrong. It's not really tested that much in terms of physiology, but you probably need to know that eventually for ICM or for PATH.